Resource dependence theory. This is one that's going to come up probably, especially if you're in a business uh, course, but in life also. And instinctively, we know this thing. So, resource dependence theory, as put forward by Hillman and colleagues in 2009, they're not the only people to write about resource dependence theory. There's a couple of other authors there on the page. Ulrich and Barney, and also Pfeffer and Salinek have done a lot of work on it. They're quite well known for resource dependence theory. Anyway, what the theory says is that a corporation is in an open system. It depends on its environment. And although constrained by your environment, managers can act to reduce environmental uncertainty and environmental dependence or dependence on other entities in the environment. Central to this is the concept of power, which is defined in this case as the control over vital resources. So if we think back to our power dimensions framework, control over valuable resources is a dimension 1 form of power. And organizations attempt to reduce the power that others have over them and increase their power over others. And this is extremely well illustrated in supply chains, for example. So businesses try to reduce resource dependence in their supply chain. Let's say Nike has outsourced the making of their shoes to other companies, and they don't just have one factory making shoes or one company manufacturing all their shoes. They have 600 companies manufacturing their shoes. So basically, if that one of those companies went and said, well, I don't like your prices, or your conditions are unreasonable, your turnaround time's ridiculous, blah, 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 they would turn around and just say, well, we don't need you. And that's being independent of the that is reducing dependence in your supply chain. The companies making the Nike shoes, on the other hand, are very dependent. So there's a very strong power imbalance between Nike and all the factories making their shoes. Okay. Here's another example that's very galling. You just have to look at that face and you want to slap him upside the head. This is Mr. Shkreli, who bought a company called Turing Pharmaceuticals. They bought the company. They changed the price of a drug that was a very common drug used for parasitic infections. It was $13.50. They bought the company and they changed the price to $750. There are no substitute products for this particular drug. And while he got put up as being the poster child for pharmaceutical greed, he doesn't look too bothered by it, does he? But the people who are relying on the drug, they have very little resource of power, and he has a lot of resource of power. Yeah, they are dependent on him. My questions here. Resource dependence theory also manifests when drugs are developed. Diseases that affect a small number of people or poor people are less likely to be invested in. Societies are dependent on drug makers to decide which drugs are developed, and they do get significant government subsidies for this, so don't let them tell you that they're taking all the risk. They're not. Should this be left to the market? Or is drug development a social good and better left to government control? What about patents? What do they do to pricing? Patents increase the power of the pharmaceutical company to control the output and the price of the drug. And the people who need the drug, they have little power. That's just an article. EMJ, what is that? Sorry, I've forgotten. It's becoming a major challenge, the price of pharmaceuticals. It's particularly so in America, and you've probably seen in movies where they jump on a bus and go to Canada and get their drugs in Canada and come back, but it's of course illegal. So drugs cost less in Canada. Here's another example of resource dependence theory. We've talked about surveillance pricing before. I don't have any information about what other people are getting as the price that comes up on their phone or their computer, but the company has all the information. So information is the valuable resource that we're talking about here. I don't have it, they do. The supply chain can be very dependent on a particular ore, lithium and other precious metals and earth metals. At the moment, the US and China and Russia are trying to get control over these markets. The control over the market talks to resource dependence theory. The one who has it has power over the one who doesn't, not just for pricing, but for development of other products. Here's another example that's relatively recent, the price of fuel. The one that I use is the 98% one, went up to $2.80 a litre. And this was because I need to use my car, so I have to buy petrol, and there aren't any substitute products for this unless I want to walk or catch the bus. So I have to pay. On the other hand, resource dependence theory doesn't necessarily imply that people are going to try and get as much power as they possibly can and use it to get more money out of you or get you to do something else through coercion. It doesn't have to result in rent seeking. It doesn't have to result in unethical practices or power differences, because it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the relationship. It depends on this idea of value creation for all, so shared value, if you like. Reciprocity. You've got something I need, I've got something you need. And you might think that, say, for example, Coles and Woolworths are dependent on dairy farmers because they need to sell milk. And the dairy farmers are dependent on Coles and Woolworths because they provide a market for selling their milk, or a place for people to go to buy their milk. It hasn't quite worked out that way for farmers, for milk producers. And you can have a think about why, when there are needs on both sides, and you could think that there could be reciprocity and a fair share of value. Why doesn't this necessarily happen? Think about it in terms of power. Then we had a little activity where we tried to come up with some different examples of resource dependency where there's mutual benefit on both sides, where one side's getting exploited, where there's monopoly and customers are getting priced out, or an example of when a company is rationally acting to reduce dependency in their supply chain, and the implication there is without actually trying to take advantage. Anyway, that's it for this one. One more to go.